Craig, can you hear us?
How about that? Now I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
I don't hear anything.
Craig, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, that's about all there is to hear.
Oh, well, you looked like you were making gestures like you were doing something.
Oh, I was asking Heather if she had the recording ready. All right, so I will call the July 21st, 2021 Cottonwood Heights Planning Commission business meeting to order. I am Jesse Allen, standing in for Commissioner Coots, who is out, and we have 4 commission members, commissioners in person, and then we have Commissioner Bevan on Zoom. So we have a quorum, at least 4. Are there any conflicts of interest or anything to disclose for this business meeting? Okay, hearing none, we will continue to our first item, which is general public comment. If anyone in person or on Zoom would like to give public comment on an issue that is not on the agenda for tonight, there are 3 items on the agenda tonight. Well, one has been removed. It was a conditional use permit for a residential office project. That one's been removed from the agenda and it's been removed. So the 2 items on the agenda are the short-term rental item and then the accessory dwelling unit item. So if you are in person or on Zoom and would like to discuss something other than those 2 items, you have 3 minutes, and we ask you to state your name first, and then you'll be given 3 minutes to make your public comment on record. Is there anyone out there that would like to give general public comment? Okay, seeing none in person and no hands going up on Zoom. We do have a hand on Zoom. We have a Joey Buchanan. We'll allow Joey to speak.
Hello, I'm sorry. I have a question. Over in our neighborhood here, they've been doing the slurry seal, and I'm wondering, because I mean it's I guess it's somewhat cosmetic, and I live over here on Hidden Oak, and then also where Grand Oak is, and Russell Park. And I'm wondering, would it be possible, and I've written the Public Works Director, and to have a street sweeper come and come and get all the small little gravel pieces out, so it's not tracking into the driveway, the garage, and then eventually into our house. It's just a small little detail, but it sure becomes annoying sometimes. If that could be done. And the other reason is we've got some kids in the neighborhood who have fallen on their bikes as they rounded the corner because the gravel is not giving them a firm surface to ride their bikes on, especially when they break and skid and wipe out. And we've had a few kids in the neighborhood do that. And I brought it up to the Public Works Director in an email, but haven't heard back. And that was about 4 or 5 days ago.
All right, so would staff like to respond to that comment?
Yeah, Joey, this is Mike Johnson. I will take down your information. I think I've emailed you before, so I will bring that to the attention of the Public Works Department and make sure you get a response, hopefully by tomorrow.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that public comment. Joey, any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, we will close the general public comment part of the meeting and move on to our business items. As I mentioned, project CUP 21010, the public hearing to receive comments on the conditional use permit of the insurance office project on Fort Union has been taken off of the agenda. And so we will move on to, is there anything else to say about that, Mike?
No, I'll just clarify that was withdrawn by the applicant.
Okay,
So that application will be closed out. And if that application comes back, it will be as a brand new proposal.
got it. All right, so then we will move on to project ZTA 21002, a public hearing to receive comments and make possible recommendation to the city council on a city-initiated zoning text amendment to chapter 19.89, short-term rentals. This is a continuation from the July 7th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Staff, would you like to give us an update on this item?
Yes, thank you. So I'll give a quick overview. I know we talked about this at the last commission meeting and in the work session, but it's been brought to the attention of the city council and at the direction of the city council for city staff to prepare an update to the city's short-term rental ordinance and also to explore other options to try to assist in improving the enforcement efforts on short-term rentals, specifically those in illegal areas where short-term rentals are not allowed, which is largely in the single-family residential zones in the city. So we've talked at length in previous meetings, both at the council and in planning commission, about some of the challenges with enforcement and what our ordinance does and does not do right now. And the city's approach, both in terms of updating an ordinance, looking at enforcement measures to help, and also engaging with the League of Cities and Towns and the state legislature to assist from that angle. But tonight, the focus of the conversation and the focus of the commission's role in this is to look at the actual written ordinance portion of that effort. So I'm going to quickly run through the proposed amendments to the ordinance that we think will help clarify largely what's already been in place in the city code, but to make clear some provisions that had caused some questions or confusion previously. The first is the definition of a short-term rental, and this is the primary area that we would like the commission's recommendation on as this moves forward to the city council, is how to define a short-term rental. Under the current ordinance that's in place today, the definition of a short-term rental is greater than 3 but fewer than 30 days. And then it states that rentals over 30 days are long-term rentals. They are allowed. Rentals fewer than 3 days are prohibited in areas where short-term rentals are allowed, and obviously in areas where short-term rentals are illegal. The state definition of short-term rental is just any rental fewer than 30 days in length. It does not have the floor of 3 days on it. It was raised in some public comments that there was a feeling that the 3 to 30 days could cause some confusion for those operating illegal rental units, thinking that a rental fewer than 3 days was allowed and not regulated. And it only regulated when you hit that 3-day threshold. The city attorney and staff have addressed this previously, and there is wording in this ordinance already that says fewer than 3 days is prohibited. So one proposed revised definition would be to keep that same language, but to move the language saying that fewer than 3 days is prohibited right into the definition at the top of the ordinance. Another option is to amend the definition of short-term rental to comply with the state code, which is just simply anything fewer than 30 days. Again, using this ordinance for legal short-term rentals, this will only really affect legal units, but may just lend clarity to those that thought there may have been a loophole that really never existed, and just say anything fewer than 30 days is short-term. As I said in the work session, the police department did give feedback that they prefer the fewer than 30-day definition. just for ease of enforcement, and wanted me to pass that along to the commission. So that's the first proposed change. A lot of this is remaining unchanged. When we get down to the section that details where short-term rentals are permitted, we're not making any functional changes here, but just emphasizing as a new subsection that this ordinance is not applicable in R1 neighborhoods, and short-term rentals are strictly prohibited and illegal in R1 areas of the city. Again, something that was already in the ordinance, but just clarified for emphasis here. And then language in the next section adding exceptions stating that any clever solution to sign a 30-day lease and then break that lease after 2 or 3 nights is also not allowed. And also to clarify that a short-term rental shall include any rental of the same property for occupancy more than once in any 30-day period. Again, to help with the perception that there's a workaround of signing a long-term lease and then violating that. So a lot of this again remains unchanged, and I will clarify again while I'm going down to the next section that this ordinance does work very well for the areas in the city where rentals are allowed. It clarifies the permitting and hearing process to approve those rentals. It has certain requirements for inspections and licensure and annual inspections and fee payments and things like that. And we get very few of these complaints in those legal short-term rental areas. So the last section here is clarifying. Again, this was incorporated by reference to another section of the city code before. It is now expressly written within the body of this ordinance that operation of a short-term rental in an area of the city where short-term rentals are illegal or operation without a permit is punishable by a Class C misdemeanor upon conviction. And that each day that any violation continues after notification by the city is considered a separate offense. As we've talked about at length previously, this still requires the collection of evidence by city code enforcement, presentation of the evidence as a case to the justice court, and it ultimately is up to a judge to carry out or assess the final penalty. And often the experience has been that the penalty has been substantially less than the maximum Class C misdemeanor type punishment. So obviously still some concerns there, but from an ordinance perspective, we find it helpful to expressly clarify that an illegal short-term rental is punishable by a Class C misdemeanor for each day of offense. And for the ordinance portion of this city effort, that's really it. I'm happy to answer any questions and then again reiterate that we are still looking again at the legislative level, at the state level, to try to address some of the roadblocks there in terms of enforcing based off of website listings, which we are not currently allowed to do, and also working more through the enforcement process and with city prosecutor to try to emphasize the terms of this ordinance and try to pursue those stricter violations. Any questions about the ordinance?
So thank you. Right. Any discussion before we open public hearing? All right. Is there, I see one hand raised on Zoom. And are there other, is there anyone in person that would like to speak on this item? Okay. All right. So we have Joey.
That's all right. Yes, that's all right. You can just call me that.
Sorry.
So my question, well, a few comments on this, on the ordinance. Does the ordinance apply to only a corporation or a company that is specializing in this type of business for the penalty? And is it possible that the fine is able to be increased, or is that up to the judge? And because you know, I'm sorry that I forgot the class of misdemeanor that it is, but maybe the max on that is only $250 or $500, which makes it, you know, not really applicable in this situation because they count it as a cost of doing business. So it has to have a little bit of sting to it. So that's one of the things that I wanted to comment on. But is it only going to apply to a business, or is it, if it's an individual owner who is doing that, does it apply to them as well? And I don't know if that is defined in the ordinances either. That's it for my comment.
All right, thank you, Joey. I'm going to ask Shane to respond to that, but I just want to reiterate that that during this public comment section, it's not really, in order to keep things orderly and timely, we unfortunately can't really have a discussion through this, but I would like to invite Shane, our city attorney, to respond to the two questions that were brought up, just for public clarity and our understanding. So the two questions I heard were a corporation versus an individual, and then also, is there any way for the fine to be increased?
The penalty can be would be imposed against whoever the owner of an operator of the property is. It can be an individual, it can be a corporation, it can be an LLC. So there isn't a distinction. The penalty, however, is set by state law. Cities cannot change the penalty for a Class C misdemeanor that is set by state statute. I think it involves a fine of up to $750, and I can't remember the potential jail time off the top of my head. But when I believe that there is a different schedule of monetary fines for business entities like corporations and LLCs as opposed to individuals. I think that the amounts are somewhat higher for business entities than they are for individuals.
Right, thank you, Shane. Are there any other people that would like to speak on this item for public comment? Okay, seeing none on Zoom or in person, do I have a motion to either continue or to close the public comment?
Move to close public comment.
All right, so we have a
And I'll second that motion.
too late, Craig. Sorry, it's the Zoom delay. So we've got a motion by Commissioner Ebler and a second by Commissioner Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? All right, so we've closed the public comment on this item. Any discussion among the commission?
Only that I think and I've stated that before, that I think we should absolutely adopt the state language as opposed to the 3 days and the 0 days. The state language is very clear.
I tend to agree.
I'm hard pressed to see how someone who can rate $500,000 is unable to ascertain that ordinance. At least from what we heard last time we met. Several people, their problem is better addressed by the current and the current 3 days. See the other
My concern with that is with the permitted short-term rentals that are legal. They've gone through the legal process of getting a permit. They're in the proper zone. I don't know that they should be limited to having to rent for more than 3 days? It seems like they should be able to rent for 1 or 2 if they wanted to. How is, if we keep the current language 3 to 30, is there a way to not limit the people who have gone through the legal process?
I think you essentially would be doing that with, if you chose the 3 to 30 or recommended that, then that would apply. Because this ordinance largely applies to legal units. This ordinance is not applicable other than to say, if you're not in these areas, it's illegal. So yeah, if no change was made, they would still be required to rent 3 to 30 days, which they have been since the ordinance has been in place. So it's not a new standard. It's not more restrictive. The updated definition would, in that sense, be less restrictive to allow them to do something that by code they haven't previously been allowed to do.
But by practice, probably have been.
A question for staff. In terms of the enforcement calls, is it primarily just and maybe not just primarily, exclusively calls from constituents for illegal short-term rentals versus allowable short-term rentals, but renting under 3 days? Has that ever been reported?
So I don't get calls directly, code enforcement's out of the police division, but in every case that we have assisted with or provided information on to code enforcement, it's been rentals in areas where they are not allowed.
The work meeting, didn't you say you had talked to the police chief and he mentioned that he was in favor of the 30-day or less definition?
Yes, that's correct.
What was staff's recommendation last time we met?
Our recommendation was that we wanted the commission to make a suggestion on where to go with the definition. And really the reason for that is the fewer than 3 days, the concern we've heard from the public is clearly addressed in the ordinance and has been clarified even further in the definition. So it's it's almost a preference at this point of, do you want to simplify to match state code, or keep it as it was and as it always has been, with the clarification moved up within the definition itself to clearly state any rental fewer than 3 days is still prohibited.
I'm in favor of simplifying. Align with what state definition.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, just knee jerk, is that the code enforcement activity should be focused more within the illegal rentals versus, the ones that are more or less abiding by the rules and regulations. And if they're doing anything, it's probably the Friday, Saturday rentals, 1 day short of the 3 day. And is it the best use of town resources, city resources, to go after the ones that are primarily trying to be compliant with the law?
So I can clarify. I think you're correct, but I do think the police chief's recommendation came from the place of he felt that if someone was operating illegally in a residential area, they could claim that they didn't know it was allowed for fewer than 3 days. And again, I've stated numerous times, the language is clear in our opinion, but he thought that could be enough to cast some reasonable doubt that they were just unaware as a property owner, that they had to abide by this ordinance for rentals fewer than 3 days. And where previous experience has seen fines and penalties on the lighter side, he was of the opinion that a clear ordinance of fewer than 30 would help in that regard.
As far as I understand it, though, I mean, we have two choices here. We either accept the staff recommendation as is, which is state language, or there would have to be a motion on the table, which we would vote on the very specific narrow provision to amend it to just the 3 days or more, or 3 days.
So our draft ordinance has provided both. So what we would look for is a motion with a recommendation
Either
over
or.
which definition. Yeah.
Basically, option 1 or option 2 on 19.89.020C. There are 2 options there. The second one would match the state definition, but then we would need to basically omit 19.89.040 because that is the one that deals with the 3 days. So if the sense of the commission is that the majority wants to see the state definition approach used, maybe I could suggest continuing this until the next meeting in a couple of weeks, and we will have a revamped version of this before you that utilizes the state definition option 2 on that subpart. I also wanted to note that on 19.89.050C, this is the one where we're emphasizing that short-term rentals are prohibited in the city's single-family residential neighborhoods. I just realized that I should have included in that parenthetical R1, RR1, and F1, not just R1. So I would like to make that change as well.
Respond to Chief Russo. Citizens are presumed to know the law. And if tomorrow morning you're coming down 65 miles an hour and get pulled over. I'm certain that, gee, I didn't know that the law was that I could only do 35 miles. For him to have the how that's intelligent. It's curious.
In light of Shane's comments about the other modifications, I think it would probably be prudent if we just move this to the August 6th meeting. So I move to continue this discussion until the August 6th meeting.
All right, we have a
Clarification is August 4th.
Sorry, August 4th. I will amend my my motion.
motion and a second. Let's go start with Commissioner Ebler.
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild, Commissioner Bevan,
Yes.
and Commissioner Allen, yes. So we'll continue this item until the August 4th meeting. It will not be for public comment because we've closed the public comment. We'll just continue the discussion. All right. Moving on to project ZTA 21001, a public hearing to receive comments and make possible recommendation to the city council on a proposed land use ordinance to create regulations for owner occupied accessory dwelling units. Staff like to give their presentation.
Thank you again. Let me share my screen here so everyone can see. So I think most of those listening along were in the work session, but for the benefit of anyone that wasn't, I'm going to run through what's preceded this text amendment change and what our recommendation is and what we're recommending here. So accessory dwelling units, unlike short-term rentals, are long-term rentals greater than 30 days within a single-family home or on the same property as a single-family home. Basement apartments, mother-in-laws, those are common terms for accessory dwelling units. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to refer to them as ADUs. So in the recent state legislative session, House Bill 82 was passed. It's called Building Code Regulations. And in that legislation, it does a few different things, but most notably, it creates or it allows internal ADUs, so ADUs within the footprint of a primary dwelling on a property, to be a permitted use in every single family residential zone in the state of Utah. So what effectively is happening here is the state has preempted this portion of local authority and said statewide internal ADUs will be allowed effective October 1st. It also puts pretty strict limitations on what a city can actually regulate or require for those internal ADUs. It adopts, and it already has adopted, updated state building code standards that create specific references and requirements for ADUs that differ from other multifamily construction. It also creates a pilot program for funding and financing of ADU related loans. And as I said, local authority is limited because of this legislation. And it says almost verbatim, except as provided, a municipality may not establish restrictions or requirements for the construction or use of one internal ADU within a primary dwelling. And specifically, we cannot restrict the size of an ADU, the square footage, that is, the total lot size that ADU is located on, or the street frontage. It does require that ADUs must comply with all applicable building, health, and fire codes. And there's a new provision that allows for the requirement that any egress window in what will be converted into an ADU has to be brought up to current building code standard. And as I said, there are other building code amendments that are adopted at the state level that are already in place that allow exceptions for the construction of ADUs as it relates to firewall separation, return air, climate control, location, things like that. So it then provides a list of what cities may do. And this is the list of the things we're allowed to do. We can require a permit or a license. We can require owner occupancy. We can prohibit multiple utility meters. We can require ADU design in a manner consistent with single family dwellings. As I stated in the work session, though, there's a separate bill that was passed that does not allow cities to impose design standards on single family dwellings anymore. So that may be a moot point there. We can require one additional off-street parking space. This was the biggest discussion point of the previous city effort to adopt an ADU ordinance was the parking requirement, but now we can only require one additional stall. We can prohibit ADUs in mobile homes or on properties with failing septic systems. We can prohibit ADUs in a zoning district covering 25% or less of the city's residential zones, and are not entirely clear on exactly the intent of that language, but we are not proposing to do that. We can prohibit ADUs on lots less than 6,000 square feet in size. We can prohibit short-term rentals in ADUs. And as I said, if there's a property that's registered as an ADU, we can use a website to enforce a short-term rental violation on that property, as long as that ADU listing is there. We can hold a lien on a property in violation of the state code following a very extensive process detailed in the state code. And we can record notice of ADU against property title to ensure that anyone doing due diligence on a property is aware of whether an ADU is legally permitted there or not. Interestingly, this legislation also removes a private homeowners association's authority to prohibit ADUs within those private communities. And as it's written today, that legislation is effective proactively and retroactively. So that being said, I will quickly run through a high level summary of the proposed ordinance. But our approach here is we had gone through this 1.5 or 2 year process previously to take public input and prepare a draft ADU ordinance that we felt would suit the city's needs and achieve what we needed it to achieve. So our approach was to start from that ordinance that ultimately was recommended by the planning commission, but denied by the city council. And from that starting point, we've made modifications to bring this ordinance in line with the new state requirements. So very quickly, we've added a purpose statement to reference the state code. We've updated definitions to comply with state code definitions and match those now. We've added language that allows, that defines where ADUs are permitted. Again, in every single family residential zone, which was proposed last time, that has not changed, with the exception of lots fewer than 6,000 square feet in size, or on lots where there's a failing septic tank. We are also continuing to leave in a possibility for detached ADUs. So this would be an ADU in an accessory building on the property. That is not regulated or governed by this state legislation. So we have more authority for those detached units. The language for detached ADUs in this proposed ordinance is exactly the same as it was when we presented this ordinance previously. So detached ADUs have to follow a much more rigorous process, which would include a planning commission, public hearing, extra parking, extra property buffering, enhanced setbacks, and a whole list of other requirements. So very rigorous standards, but those have not been updated or changed since the last time this was presented. And then from there, the approval process, the city intends to require an inspection, either an inspection of new work needed to bring the ADU up to code, or a walkthrough inspection to verify that an area proposed for an ADU is already up to code, and then a yearly license so we can keep track of the inventory of legal ADUs and licensed ADUs within the city. Again, very similar to what we were proposing last time. That has not changed. And then, like I said, the detached ADU would be the same thing, but with a conditional use permit from the planning commission. So then we get into development standards, and it's what we've talked about already. We are requiring what we're allowed to require for internal ADUs. The biggest difference here from the previous ordinance is the requirement for 1 parking stall instead of 2. And that is in addition to the 2 that are already required for any single family use. And we are proposing that 1 additional stall cannot be a tandem stall, so cannot be located in front of or behind one of the other parking stalls required on the property. It has to be off to the side somewhere. Again, all the other details here, they're available in the planning commission packet. The parking standards and everything else for detached ADUs is much more stringent and is as it was last time. We are also requiring a notice of ADU to be recorded against each property for 2 purposes, really. One is to provide that information for anyone purchasing a home to know if an ADU is advertised, that it has gone through the proper procedure and gotten a permit or a license. And 2 is to, that will be updated, and if there's any change of ownership, that a new notice of ADU will be recorded to ensure that the current owner of the property is also the resident of the property, and ensure that that owner occupancy requirement is always being met. And then termination. Again, we could follow the state's process for terminating an ADU license, or if there's a change in ownership and it's not updated, or there's any other violation of what's proposed in here, that would be grounds for termination. But again, not a lot of differences from the previous ADU draft other than those required by the state code. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. And then just procedurally, this needs to be adopted by the council by October 1st. So we are looking for a recommendation at least at the next planning commission meeting.
Mike, do you have a feeling for why the state thought it was appropriate to regulate detached?
So why they're allowing cities to continue to regulate detached? I do not have a sense.
No, my understanding is that they
No, so all the code changes have taken away local authority to regulate internal ADUs. Yeah, detached is fully up to the city. We could still prohibit them outright and not be in violation of state code.
You know why the state didn't deal with it?
I don't. I think the internal ADUs are much more prevalent, and that's what the state started with. Detached ADUs are a much greater investment for property owners and aren't feasible on many properties.
Mike, I have a question. Can I see the slide with the permissible things that we can do?
Open here, sorry.
So on the fourth bullet point, with the asterisks,
Mhm.
I assume the state legislation, I just quickly looked at this, is that House Bill 98?
Sounds right.
So I did a quick look and saw that it added a new part to LUDMA that prohibited the regulation, but there are a series of exceptions in which we still have some authority. A couple of them are development agreements with design standards, residential areas developed before 1950, water efficient landscaping requirements in rear yards, PUD plats or overlay zone granted for increased density or other benefit not available under the zone. So we still do have some authority. Is my reading of this correct?
Yes, and I, in our draft ordinance, I think we have a very general reference that the internal ADU and the entrance to it have to fit the character of the area. So I don't know that a lot of those situations will apply very broadly in Cottonwood Heights. Certainly in historic districts elsewhere, there may be some more stringent standards, but we do have the language to cover it to the extent that we can.
Right. I left out the historic one just because I figured the
Yeah.
application wasn't necessarily there, but
Yeah, or certainly if any area is regulated by overarching design standards, like in a planned unit development,
right.
Those
They still
presumably
apply.
could resume
Yeah.
or could continue.
Yeah. Has there been any thought in, we don't have anything in the actual language in terms of the water efficiency landscaping requirements, given the current drought situation and whatever. Is this something that we care about?
Maybe, but I don't think that's related to ADUs per se, to require backyard landscaping if you're doing an internal ADU. I don't think there's a great nexus there.
Right.
So under different city design standards, we could pursue that, but under ADUs, I don't think it's entirely applicable.
Appropriate. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
The reasons we should not vote on.
No, we kind of need a vote by the next meeting. If you're ready today, we certainly could take that.
All right, thank you, Mike. Is there anyone who would like to give public comment on this agenda item? See a raised hand in the Zoom, Robert Jacobs.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll try to go I have 3 minutes. Is that my time?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll go through this real quick. Just a few preliminaries. I found out about this with an email last week, I think. And the email didn't even mention this was on the agenda. It just said there was a planning commission meeting. I had to actually go onto the website, look at the agenda to see there was an ADU meeting tonight. Over the last week, I've talked to half a dozen of my neighbors, and none of them even know what an ADU is. And none of them had any idea there was a meeting going on about it. I bought a home in Alta Hills, a little community right off Danish Road, about 8700 South, 45 years ago, in an R1 zone development. To me, ADUs are just like 1984 doublespeak for R2 development. I mean, what does it mean that you have two families living in a single family zoned home? That doesn't even make sense. But another thing I was going to bring up was I talked to Cottonwood Improvement District about ADUs, and they said anybody with an ADU, they consider that an R2 unit, and they expect people to pay double the fee that we pay for our sewer. So I think at a minimum, Cottonwood Heights ought to notify them of any people that develop ADUs. Second, I looked at some stuff from other cities, and they have things like, for instance, as far as parking, they say they require an additional parking spot, but they also say any additional vehicles owned by occupants must be accommodated on site. On-street parking will be reserved for visitors only. Okay. All entrances have to be located to the ADU, have to be located on the side or rear of the dwelling. Occupancy restrictions, the occupants of the ADU or vice versa, depending on who's in the ADU, have to either be related in a normal family manner, blood, marriage, or adoption, or up to 2 unrelated people. So they limit it to 2 unrelated people outside of a family. Our current code considers a family 4 unrelated people. That means a house with an ADU could have 8 unrelated people living in the house on 30-day things. That means like almost 100 different people over a year could be in that single house. So I don't know how any of this is going to be enforceable. I mean, that many different people living in an area with friends and visitor, and who knows who lives there and who doesn't. The other thing was that even in our original proposal, the ADUs were conditional permits. I realize the state made it different now, but in other words, when it was conditional, it was a lot easier to do things. People had to be notified, yada, yada. Now it's a permitted thing, which means once we do this, it's done. People we're not going to be able to undo it like we could with a conditional permit.
Right.
So we should really give this a lot of thought.
Thank you.
I'd like to see a neighbor notification of people applying for an ADU. I'd like to see a display of the license that shows they have an ADU. Are there any requirements for kitchens, like a stove or refrigerator, bathroom? Is any of that required in the ADU?
Thank you, Robert. The timer went off here a little bit ago.
Okay. I still have a few more, but okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Just a point of information on on the overall comments. I think it's important as we frame this conversation, as we discussed in the work session, if we do nothing, the law goes into effect October 1st. That's correct, right? So this isn't a situation of us opting to do something or not do something. The law at the state level is already there. And so we have to decide whether or not we're going to do anything at a local level. Because as of October 1st, it's allowed.
Right.
I guess I would also note that the state statute allows cities to impose some restrictions, which would be a reason for enacting our own ordinance. If we don't impose the restrictions that we're allowed to impose via our own ordinance, the law will still go into effect, but without those restrictions in place.
Right. We went through this a couple of years ago for weeks and weeks and spent hours and hours on this. And I remember we talked about each one of the things that Robert or the last commenter brought up. We talked about parking locations, types of parking, who could park there, where do visitors park. We talked about entries and what was appropriate, whether the front or the side or the back. We talked about how many related people could be there. We talked about all these things. So I was thinking that it might be helpful because there were a couple of things that sparked my memory about those days and conversations. And maybe a couple of those would be good to clarify for the commission why either it's not in there or kind of how we're addressing it. So Mike, if you don't mind, I was just wondering if we could go through quickly kind of a couple of these. So the related people, the limit on how many related people can be in the unit, is that allowed by the state code or not?
It's in this bill as well, not a new change, but referenced in there. The state says a city cannot define a family as I think it says fewer than 3 unrelated people. And I believe the city definition is 4 unrelated people. We could not say 2 unrelated because that violates the state's definition of a family.
But we could lower ours to this to match the state.
Yes, if the numbers I'm giving you are correct off the top of my head, then theoretically, yes, we could go down to 3 instead of 4.
And then regarding the entries, that was based on the conversation we had during your presentation about relating to the adjacent context.
Yes, within the parameters that we have very little, I think, authority to do that unless it meets one of these specific categories of imposing design standards, of being a house before 1947 or in a development agreement project or something like that.
Okay. And then parking was limited by the state, correct? Pretty
Yes,
abruptly.
we can require 0 or 1 for an ADU. What we are proposing, which I think is the extent of our authority, that the 1 extra stall is not a tandem stall. And then we are still requiring the 2 for any single family home. So at least 3 non-tandem off-street parking stalls for any residence with an ADU. But we cannot restrict who parks where on a property. We can just require that the 3 are there.
Question on that piece of the parking. Is there any rule or regulation in terms of the segregation of the main unit parking versus the ADU parking? Or could they say on a 2-car garage, one belongs to the ADU, 1 belongs to the main?
Sure, yeah,
Okay,
doesn't matter.
it's just a count, correct?
3 total off-street, yep.
Those were the questions I had. Regarding the public notice, how does the city plan to notice for the council meetings? Is this something that might rise to the level of the journal or the publication, the newsletter that goes out?
Yeah, we probably could. Usually, if we know of agenda items ahead of time, there's a little column in the journal that will show the upcoming agenda items. But we could, if we haven't missed the deadline, even in September, we could put an announcement in the city newsletter, making people aware of the new changes to the state and that the city will be enacting an ordinance accordingly.
I almost wonder if it's even more valuable to maybe write a proactive piece in there explaining what has happened with the state code and
I think it's a good idea. So we will do that. Whether it's August or September, I don't know, but we'll get that in there.
And then regarding fees, in terms of the improvement district or fees, we can't limit the number of utility meters, but in terms of making Cottonwood Heights Cottonwood Improvement District aware of an ADU, how does that work?
We only really intersect with them on major development and new construction projects in terms of making sure they can serve a property. But the assessment of fees and all of that is really done by them. Certainly we would have an inventory of where licensed ADUs are, can provide that information to them. But I don't think we'd go too much beyond that.
Are there any other people that would like to comment on this agenda item, either in person or on Zoom? Okay, seeing none. Any discussion? Well, any motion on what we should do with public comment?
Move to close public comment.
Second.
Right, so we have a motion to close the public comment by Commissioner Wild and a second by Commissioner Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so we have closed the public comment section on this item. Any discussion among the commission?
I mean, I heard Commissioner Wild question whether or not we should vote tonight. I'd be okay continuing it. I'd be okay potentially voting. I think out of prudence, maybe just trying to get a gauge of where the rest of the commission is at this point.
Given the amount of time that we spent.
I can't hear Bob when he speaks in his microphone.
Given the amount of time we spent on this previously, I believe we need to move this on down the road. According- I move that yeah, the recommendation of approval for chapter 19.75 on accessory dwelling units as drafted by staff.
Discussion on the motion?
It hasn't been seconded yet.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, let's roll call. Commissioner Ebler?
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild? Commissioner Bevan?
Yes.
Commissioner Allen, yes. So we have forwarded that on to the city council. And I think that however staff, decides to let the public know about this, I think it would be appropriate to do so, given their interest the last go around.
Yeah, we'll make sure it gets in the newsletter
Okay.
before any vote's taken.
Given the timing of our vote and council's meeting schedule, what's the anticipated meeting for public comment on this or public hearing on it?
It will probably be introduced in the work session for discussion, and then, I don't know exactly. I'd say mid-August or early September for public comment. But I think it's wise to try to get the word out there first and on what we're up against and what we're facing and what the deadline is before we schedule that hearing.
All right, we don't have any minutes to approve. Is that correct? I don't see it on the agenda. Okay. One other item back on the short-term rentals, there were a couple items I brought up in the work session where we've decided to continue that if staff has the ability to research the ability to add or require short-term rentals in Cottonwood Heights to publish their permit number or sort of disclose that they don't have a permit. I think that would be helpful. And then the second was, well, actually, that's the main one I'm interested in. The second one was more based on what happens to the renter, and if we can somehow get more negative reviews from the renters that are impacted by someone not in compliance with the law. All right. Any other discussion, or do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Wha-
I heard Ebler more. So we have a motion to adjourn and
A pretty popular motion.
a second. Or do I have a second, Commissioner Wild? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
What am I supposed to say at the end, the meeting? Do I have to say anything beyond that? Like, okay.
But
Yeah, okay.